They laughed at his stupid grenade trap until it wiped out 23 Germans in 19 seconds. Hürtgen Forest, Germany, November 22, 1944. 4:10 a.m., cold rain collected on the edges of the pine branches and dripped steadily onto the collapsed foxholes of Company 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th U.S. Division. The ground had turned to thick mud days earlier, and every step or movement produced a wet, heavy sound. The forest had been chewed apart by weeks of artillery fire. Fallen pines lay in crisscrossed heaps, forming natural barriers and narrow channels the men now relied on for cover. Private Elias Mercer, age 24, sat at the lip of his slit trench with his M1 rifle resting across his thighs. He had been in uniform for almost a year, having been drafted out of rural Oregon, where he had worked as a lumbermill assistant. Before the war, most of his days were spent hauling timber, repairing equipment, or clearing brush. He had no combat experience before arriving in Europe. The Hürtgen Forest was his first major operation. Elias had been assigned to Company E2 months earlier. His responsibilities were straightforward: maintain sector watch, reinforce positions, deliver ammunition when needed, and help repel German infiltration attempts. In this part of the front, German troops frequently tested the American lines in small groups, attempting to cut wire, capture prisoners, or force a withdrawal. Elias had already seen 2 night assaults since arriving. He had been ordered to take the watch again that night because he was one of the few soldiers still alert enough to do it. The long hours, cold rain, and constant tension had worn most of the men down. Sleep had become shallow and scattered. The squad's strength, effectively 9 men left, had been reduced by trench foot, sickness, and shelling. Their platoon, originally around 40 strong, was down to 23. Sergeant Ray Donnelly, 32 years old, lay wrapped in a rain-soaked poncho a meter behind him. Donnelly had worked as a mechanic in Pennsylvania before the war. He was one of the more experienced soldiers in the company, calm, practical, and generally respected. His main task was to keep his squad functional, distribute rations, assign watches, direct fire during attacks, and make decisions when radio contact failed. He had been awake for most of the last 48 hours. Next to him lay PFC Lewis Barrett, 22, a farmhand from Missouri who served as the squad's automatic rifle assistant. Corporal Hines, 27, a former factory machinist from Ohio, slept in a shallow depression nearby, curled around his bar to keep the weapon out of the mud. The rest of the squad, Fisher, Alton, Valles, and 2 replacements who had arrived only last week, were scattered in foxholes to their left and right. Their mission was not complex. They were holding a sector of the front line that ran through a dense section of forest. The goal: prevent German forces from slipping through gaps in the American defenses and reaching the road network behind them. This particular stretch of forest was part of the larger Hürtgen operations, a series of costly, slow-moving battles in rough terrain. Company E did not expect to advance. They simply had to hold their ground until relieved. Elias leaned forward and scanned the narrow, muddy corridor ahead of him, a natural funnel created by 2 large fallen trees. Patrols had reported that German troops had been moving through this area at night. The ground confirmed it. The day before, Elias had found several clear boot prints in the mud. They were deep and sharply defined, not softened by rain. That told him they were recent. The tread pattern was distinctly German. He tightened his grip on his rifle and listened. The Hürtgen Forest played tricks on the ears, but Elias had lived his whole life in wooded terrain. He understood the difference between the shifting of a branch in the wind and deliberate movement. Tonight, he sensed movement. Not much, not loud, but enough to make him keep his eyes fixed on the trail. Behind him, Sergeant Donnelly's voice broke the silence. "You're still up?" Elias answered without turning. "Yes, Sergeant." Donnelly shifted slightly, the poncho rustling. "You've been on watch longer than scheduled. I'll stay on it." "Why?" Elias hesitated, then said, "I think they're getting closer to this trail." Donnelly didn't dismiss the idea. He'd seen how German patrols worked. They probed the same paths repeatedly, studying weak spots. He knew Mercer had found prints the previous day. Still, he exhaled slowly. "We'll deal with it when they show." He settled back into his trench, though he didn't fully relax. Elias continued to watch the tree line. Every sound mattered. Every small shift in the darkness could be the start of something. A few minutes passed. Then he heard it again. A faint crack. A branch disturbed. A careful step. Not rushed, not clumsy. He steadied his breathing. The Germans were out there. Close. Likely another reconnaissance team testing the edge of the American line. And that was the moment the idea took clear shape in Elias's mind. A simple trick. A basic device. Something improvised from supplies they already had. It wouldn't stop a full assault, but it might break an infiltration attempt before it started. He didn't mention it yet. He wasn't sure his sergeant would approve. He wasn't sure it would work at all. But in this terrain, where visibility was low, artillery was unpredictable, and infantry often fought at 10 yards, it might give them a fighting chance. He kept watching the darkness, waiting for the next sound, while the cold rain continued to fall. The night before the trap. The night before the 19 seconds that would define everything that followed. The ambush site lay 200 meters east of the platoon's temporary position, an uneven stretch of forest where the ground dipped sharply into a natural bowl. The Germans used the depression as a staging point every dawn, gathering there before pushing their patrols forward. Intelligence from the previous night's listening post suggested the enemy moved through this exact corridor with predictable discipline. 2 scouts, a radio operator, a 7-man rifle group, and finally the NCO leading the column. Corporal Thomas Reed moved first, stepping carefully between wet branches. He was 27, a machinist in civilian life, quiet and patient, traits that made him effective with improvised traps. Reed carried a canvas pouch with 2 fragmentation grenades and the thin wire he planned to use. He understood the stakes. With ammunition running low, the platoon needed to inflict maximum damage without wasting rifle rounds. His task was clear: set a lethal, silent trigger line before dawn. Private Elias Mercer, 21, followed close behind. He had been in combat for only 4 months and knew the forest by memory after weeks of defensive operations. His task in this chapter was simple but essential: maintain rear security, stay alert for German patrols, and help Reed survey the terrain for an optimal detonation angle. They crouched behind a fallen oak. Reed scanned the depression below them. The terrain sloped inward, forming a natural funnel. Wet leaves muffled every movement. "This is it," Reed whispered. "If they follow their usual route, they'll step right through here." Mercer lowered himself into a prone position and observed the path the Germans had used the day before. Boot prints, crushed leaves, and broken fern stalks formed a visible lane. The ground dipped just enough that the Germans wouldn't see anything until they were already inside the trap's radius. Reed unpacked the materials. He held the wire between his fingers, checking tension. The morning humidity made the metal cold. "Keep watch," Reed said quietly. Mercer positioned himself behind a thick tree trunk and rotated his rifle to a low ready. He listened for distant branches snapping, a sound every soldier learned to distinguish from birds or falling debris. Reed worked with methodical precision. He secured the first grenade to a root system, aligning the pin and spoon with the wire's planned pull direction. He checked the safety levers angle twice. Any mistake would kill them before the enemy even arrived. He moved 3 meters to his left, placed the second grenade behind a moss-covered rock, and aligned it to create overlapping fragmentation patterns. Both grenades were spaced to cover the center of the depression, but far enough apart that a single misfire wouldn't disable the other. The wire connected them. Reed measured the line height by crouching and raising his hand, roughly knee level for a marching soldier. That height ensured the first man entering the corridor would catch the line without noticing it. Mercer crawled back to him. "They're predictable enough," Mercer said quietly. "Same time window, same formation. That's why this will work," Reed replied. "We're not trying to hunt them. We're just letting them walk into it." They surveyed the scene one final time. No loose dirt, no exposed metal, nothing that reflected light. The trap blended naturally with the forest floor. Reed and Mercer moved to a fallback position 25 meters uphill. From there, they would be concealed with a full view of the enemy's approach route. The forest canopy dimmed the early morning light, creating just enough darkness to keep them hidden. Mercer adjusted his helmet and exhaled slowly. "We wait now." Reed nodded. "Now we wait. They'll be here soon." They settled into silence. The forest around them was still, the air damp, the sound of distant artillery faint but constant. Both men understood the importance of the next hour. Their platoon survival depended on slowing the German push, and this trap was the first step. Behind them, the rest of the platoon prepared fallback firing positions. Every soldier's action depended on the success of the ambush Reed was building. If it worked, the German patrol would be shattered before it could report American movements. If it failed, the enemy would know exactly where to attack next. The forest remained quiet. The trap was set. The waiting had begun. Dawn arrived with a dull, colorless light filtering through the dense tree-line. The forest settled into its usual sequence of sounds: dripping branches, shifting leaves, and the distant echo of artillery that never fully stopped during that phase of the war. Reed and Mercer stayed motionless in their concealed position, 25 meters uphill from the trap. Their rifles rested across their arms, but neither man expected to fire unless the situation collapsed. Reed checked his watch. The Germans usually passed through the depression between 6:10 and 6:25. It was a routine learned from observation posts and listening teams over the last 3 days. The enemy favored strict schedules, even under pressure. Mercer adjusted the strap of his helmet and slowly rose his binoculars just above a patch of ferns. "Visibility's still low," he whispered. "That helps us," Reed replied. At 6:12, Mercer's grip tightened. "I hear movement." Reed tilted his head and listened. The sound was faint but clear. Synchronized footfalls, the soft clicking of equipment, and occasional low German speech. Not hurried, not cautious. A normal patrol, assuming the area was clear. Reed and Mercer lowered themselves further into their cover position. The first figures appeared between the trees. 2 scouts spaced deliberately, moving with practiced efficiency. Their rifles were held at mid-level, scanning the area. Both wore damp field jackets, their boots darkened by mud. The scouts' route aligned exactly with the expected pattern. They passed along the northern ridge before cutting diagonally toward the depression. Reed whispered, "They're taking the same track." Mercer kept his breathing slow. His responsibility was to confirm the line of march and ensure no flanking group would compromise their position. "No one on the sides," he said. "Column looks standard." The scouts crouched briefly at the edge of the dip, scanning for threats. After a short pause, they signaled the rest of the patrol forward. The next soldier carried the radio, its long antenna visible even in the dim terrain. Behind him walked a 7-man rifle group, boots sinking into the wet ground with each step. The German NCO, the last man, kept his hand near his belt, his eyes scanning the rear. His uniform showed more wear than the others, indicating long operations in the area. Reed tightened his jaw. "They're committed," he murmured. The first scout descended into the depression, his boot landing within centimeters of the invisible wire. He stepped over it without touching it. Mercer exhaled silently through his nose, too close. The second scout followed. Still nothing. Reed kept his eyes locked on the tripline location. He knew the ideal moment wasn't the scouts. Both men stayed light on their feet and could move unpredictably. The true strike point was the radio operator or one of the riflemen behind him. Their heavier load meant less attention to footing. The radio operator stepped down the slope. His pack shifted slightly. His boot moved forward closer, then stopped. He bent down for a moment to adjust the strap on his equipment. Reed and Mercer froze. The operator stood up again and resumed walking. 3 steps later, his foot caught the wire. There was a sharp metallic snap, the sound of tension releasing. For half a second, the patrol continued moving, unaware of what had happened. Reed whispered, "There it is." The second grenade spoon released first, followed a split second later by the first. The delay was less than a heartbeat. The radio operator stiffened, recognizing the sound too late. Reed pressed his body flat against the earth. "Brace," he said quietly. The grenades detonated almost simultaneously. The explosion burst through the depression in two overlapping waves. Leaves, soil, shrapnel, and fragments of rock blasted upward. The shock wave struck the trees closest to the blast, sending vibrational ripples through the undergrowth. German shouts filled the air, abrupt and panicked. The patrol collapsed into disarray. The radio operator was thrown sideways. Two riflemen fell immediately. The NCO dove behind a log, shouting commands that were barely audible over the ringing aftermath of the grenades. Reed observed the scene with controlled focus. "Count," he said. Mercer studied the chaos. 5 down. Others disorganized. The surviving Germans attempted to regroup, but the terrain worked against them. The depression that had given them cover now became a trap, offering no safe direction to retreat without crossing the blast zone again. A wounded rifleman tried to crawl uphill. His helmet rolled off and tumbled to the bottom. Reed and Mercer didn't fire. Their orders were to remain hidden unless discovered. The goal was disruption, not a prolonged engagement. The forest echoed with groans, scrambling boots, and rapid German speech. One of the remaining soldiers attempted to pull the radio operator to safety. The NCO shouted again, this time signaling a retreat. The remnants of the patrol staggered back the way they came, leaving behind equipment and wounded men. Reed waited until the last figure disappeared behind the tree line. Mercer whispered, "That worked better than expected." Reed nodded once. "We'll report the results. And then we reset for whatever comes next." They did not approach the blast site. That would be the job of the platoon sergeant and the intel team later. Their responsibility now was to clear the area quietly and move back to their fallback position. The ambush had been successful, but the day was far from over. The forest stayed quiet for nearly an hour after the ambush. Reed and Mercer held their position the entire time, watching for any sign that another German element might push through. The morning fog had lifted, revealing more of the terrain. Uneven ground, scattered fir roots, and a network of narrow deer trails winding between broken trees. Nothing moved except drifting smoke from the detonated grenades in the depression. At 7:40, Reed gave the signal to withdraw. Both men moved low, passing through patches of brush and over a narrow ridge until they reached a shallow trench line dug by their platoon 2 days earlier. The trenches were rough, just deep enough to shield a man from small arms fire and shrapnel, but they created a defensible position along the tree line. Corporal Alton Briggs, the platoon's senior NCO, knelt by a crate of ammunition, checking bandoliers for defects. Briggs was 34, older than most of the unit, with a habit of inspecting everything twice. His job was to keep the platoon functioning regardless of terrain, weather, or losses. He looked up when Reed and Mercer approached. "You two back on time," Briggs said. "What happened out there?" Reed gave a concise report. Patrol walked through the depression. Trip line did its job. At least 5 out of action. The rest withdrew in disorder. Briggs nodded. "Good, but they'll react. That NCO won't let a hit like that go unanswered." Reed already knew. They'll send a larger force to probe the line. Briggs pointed to the tree line behind him, where several men were reinforcing firing positions with branches and loose dirt. "We hold here until company says otherwise. You two get some water and reload." Reed and Mercer moved to the supply tarp near a broken stump. Private Hale, the youngest man in the platoon at 19, handed each of them a canteen and 2 fresh clips. "You really got them?" Hale asked, trying to sound calm. Reed didn't embellish. "Yes." The line stayed alert. Men checked rifle sights, adjusted helmets, and reinforced cover with whatever materials were at hand. The forest ground was still damp from the early rain, and the men's uniforms carried streaks of mud up to the knees. No one spoke unless necessary. At 8:10, Lieutenant Carter arrived from Company HQ, moving briskly with a folded map under his arm. He crouched beside Briggs and unfolded the map onto a patch of level ground. Reed and Mercer joined them as Carter pointed to a contour marking. Enemy platoon was last reported regrouping near this edge of the forest. "Our guess is they'll sweep the depression and push toward this line to test our strength." Briggs tapped the map. "Here, this crossing. If they press through here, they'll hit us head on." Carter agreed. Expect them within the hour. We're not expecting armor too tight in the trees, but there might be a machine gun team. Mercer inspected the tree line to the north. Visibility is 30 meters at best. They'll be close before we see them. That's why we're repositioning, Carter said. Reed, Mercer, your ambush worked. You know the ground better than anyone. I want you posted forward of the line, 15 meters out. Early warning. You fall back once they're committed. Reed understood immediately. It was a dangerous assignment, but necessary. We'll take the same route as before, Reed said. Briggs handed each man a fresh grenade. Keep low. Don't shoot unless you have to. Identify them before they identify you. Reed and Mercer moved out again, taking a narrow path between trees until they reached a shallow embankment overlooking the same depression from earlier. Smoke still lingered faintly. Equipment from the German patrol remained scattered. Loose pouches, a torn field map, and a dented mess tin. The air smelled of burnt soil and ruptured metal. Reed scanned the area. If they're coming, this is where they'll check first. Mercer settled down behind a fallen log. You think I'll move fast? No, they'll move carefully this time. For the next 20 minutes, the forest stayed still. Reed used the time to review nearby escape routes, noting which patches of undergrowth offered the best cover for a quick retreat. He and Mercer had practiced silent fallback drills before. They knew exactly where to step to avoid snapping twigs or disturbing loose branches. At 8:37, Mercer tensed. Movement. North side. Reed adjusted his position. Shadows moved between the trees, slow, deliberate, purposeful. German helmets appeared briefly through gaps in the foliage. This group was larger. They advanced in controlled intervals, covering each other with precision. Their formation and pace indicated a trained assault element, likely the same platoon the earlier patrol had belonged to. Reed observed carefully. At least 15, possibly more behind them. Mercer watched a pair of Germans kneel behind a tree, signaling to someone farther back. They're checking the depression first. Reed nodded. It'll slow them down, but not enough. The point scout approached the depression cautiously. He used the barrel of his rifle to probe the ground before stepping in. The German spoke in short, clipped phrases, reporting casualties, scanning for secondary traps. The body of the radio operator had been covered with a field jacket, which meant they had returned earlier to recover wounded and assess losses. Reed whispered, "They're almost done. Once they spread out, we move." Mercer kept his voice low. "Just say when." The Germans reorganized quickly. The NCO from earlier was back, identifiable by the scarf tied around his neck. He gestured toward the direction of the American line, spreading his men across a wider arc. Their intent was clear: advance until they met resistance, then push through. Reed stretched his fingers once, preparing for movement. When they reached those cedars, he said, "We fall back." The cedars stood 10 meters from the American forward post. Once the Germans crossed them, Reed and Mercer would have seconds to withdraw before being overrun. The assault group moved. Tension tightened across the forest floor. Every step they took brought them closer to the line, and closer to the moment Reed and Mercer would have to sprint without exposing themselves. The counterattack was underway. The Germans advanced in a staggered line, spread across the slope with disciplined spacing. Their boots pressed into the wet leaves, making only faint noise, but Reed and Mercer heard every step from their forward position. The forest canopy filtered the late morning light in uneven patches, creating alternating stripes of brightness and shadow across the enemy formation. Reed kept his eyes on the two cedar trees ahead. "Wait," he whispered. Mercer stayed low, gripping the stock of his rifle, but keeping his finger off the trigger. "They're getting close." The German NCO raised his fist, silent signal. The line slowed and adjusted formation. Two machine gun assistants moved forward, their leader carrying an MG-34 across his shoulder. Their posture suggested they were expecting contact soon. Reed leaned slightly to the right, double-checking the fallback route. When the second machine gun man reaches the cedars, we pull back. The first German passed the cedars. Then the second. Reed tapped Mercer's arm. "Go." Both men slipped backward, almost gliding across the ground. Their movements were deliberate, rehearsed, and silent. They avoided loose branches, skirted around exposed roots, and stayed behind narrow rises in the terrain that shielded them from view. The two had practiced disengagements many times during their time in the company, but this was the closest enemy advance they had ever withdrawn from without firing. Voices behind them grew sharper, German commands. The assault line increased its pace, moving into final approach. Reed and Mercer reached the edge of the shallow trench line, where Briggs and the rest of the platoon were already in position. Reed slid into place. "They're coming in fast." Briggs nodded once. "Hold fire until they're inside 30 meters." The platoon spread across a rough, semicircle of earth and roots. Some soldiers crouched behind logs, others inside depressions dug earlier. The ground was uneven, but it gave them enough concealment to stay unseen until the Germans were nearly on top of them. Reed steadied his breathing. The forest grew silent again, but this time the silence was tense and unified, an entire line of men waiting for the same moment. Boots approached. Branches cracked. A helmet edge appeared through the undergrowth. Then another. The Germans moved in a low crouch now, rifles up, sweeping the tree line. Their line was tight, pushing directly toward the American position. They believed Reed's earlier trap was the outer edge of the defense, not the actual front line. Briggs whispered, "Wait." The first German stepped within 40 meters. Another moved up beside him. The machine gun team positioned themselves, preparing to deploy the MG-34 on a low stump directly facing the trench line. Briggs exhaled. "Not yet." At 33 meters, the German point man paused and raised his rifle. He sensed something. Reed watched his shoulders tense. Briggs raised his hand slowly, in order to hold. The machine gun man knelt, placing the MG-34 on the stump. Reed counted the seconds in his head, calculating distance, angle, and timing. The barrel locked forward. Briggs lowered his hand. Now, the forest erupted with rifle fire. The platoon opened up in a single, overwhelming burst. The crack of M1 Garand's echoed through the trees, followed by the deeper thump of a bar from the right flank. Leaves shredded under the sudden volume of rounds. The Germans staggered immediately. The MG-34 gunner was hit before he finished aligning the weapon. He fell sideways, the gun slipping from his hands. His assistant tried to drag him back, but a second burst forced him to drop flat. The German point man fired one rapid shot blindly at the tree line before collapsing. Reed placed controlled rounds into the center of the formation. He fired 3 times in steady rhythm, aiming only at visible shapes and movement. Mercer kept the right side covered, firing in short bursts, ensuring no German could flank the line. The assault group tried to respond, but they had walked directly into a prepared defense. Their positions offered little cover, only scattered trees and low brush. The NCO shouted for his men to spread out and return fire. A few did, firing hurriedly, rounds slamming into tree trunks near Reed's head. Splinters snapped off the wood. Briggs shouted, "Left side, shift fire." MG team trying to pull back. 2 Americans on the far left adjusted their aim. The German machine gun assistant, attempting to drag the MG-34 behind a tree, dropped instantly. The next seconds unfolded rapidly. A German rifleman tried to rush forward to a small rise in the ground. Reed saw the movement and fired once. The man fell forward, sliding down the slope. Another German attempted to throw a grenade. Mercer shot him before he could pull the pin. The NCO tried to rally 2 remaining riflemen behind a broken stump, but a burst from a bar tore through the stump and forced them out of sight. In total, the firefight lasted 19 seconds. Then it stopped as suddenly as it began. The surviving Germans, only 3 or 4 of them, abandoned the assault and retreated into the forest at full speed. Their boots pounded across the ground, fading quickly into the distance. The platoon didn't pursue. Their orders were to hold. Reed kept his rifle aimed for several more seconds. No movement. Briggs raised his voice. "Cease fire. Check ammo." The forest returned to stillness, except for the smell of gunpowder and drifting smoke. The ground ahead was scattered with equipment, torn branches, and the bodies of the German assault team. Mercer wiped dirt from his sleeve. That was fast. Reed said nothing at first. His breathing steadied as he scanned the terrain. They walked straight into it. They never expected a full line here. Briggs crouched beside them. That ambush earlier, that's what did it. They assumed the trap was the front. Reed nodded slowly. Then the 19 seconds weren't luck. They were the result of the trap. Briggs gave a short, acknowledging look. Report to the lieutenant. He'll want every detail. The line held. The counterattack had failed, and the simple grenade trap had shaped the outcome far more than anyone anticipated. The gunfire had ended, but the forest did not return to normal right away. Smoke hung shallow in the air, low enough to cling to the undergrowth. The smell of burnt powder mixed with the wet earth and broken branches. It took nearly a full minute before any man in the trench moved. Lieutenant Carter was the first to stand fully upright. "We hold position," he said. "No advance. No movement past the line." Carter's orders reflected standard doctrine. After a short, intense engagement, units avoided immediate pursuit. Hidden enemy elements, mines, or machine guns could be waiting ahead. The platoon stayed in place. Reed ejected his partial clip and inserted a fresh one. He checked the chamber, then slung his rifle across his chest. Mercer did the same. Both men scanned the area, verifying that no wounded Germans were attempting to regroup or counterattack. Briggs walked the length of the trench line, checking on each soldier one by one. "Everyone accounted for?" he asked. Private Hale raised his hand. "Two slight grazes," Hale said, pointing to a cut on his sleeve and a nick on his helmet's edge. "Nothing serious." Briggs inspected Hale's helmet. The metal had a fresh, bright scrape. "Keep your head lower next time." The rest of the platoon reported no injuries. It was rare for a rifle platoon to repel a German assault of that size without taking losses, but the ambush had given them a decisive advantage. At 9:10, Carter ordered a slow, controlled sweep of the immediate front, not to advance, but to secure equipment, check for documents, and ensure no wounded enemy soldier posed a threat. "Reed, Mercer, Briggs. You three go. 10 meters ahead only. Nobody crosses the depression." Reed nodded. "Understood." The three men moved forward carefully. Their boots pressed into soft soil mixed with debris from the firefight. The forest seemed brighter now that the smoke was thinning, but visibility remained limited. A broken rifle lay near the first fallen German. Reed checked the man's belt for maps or notes. Nothing. He moved on. Farther ahead, a torn satchel lay half open. Inside were loose cartridges, a small field dressing, and a folded paper. Briggs opened it carefully. "It's a section diagram," he said quietly. "Positions for an earlier setup. Probably outdated." Reed examined the diagram. "This confirms it. They weren't expecting us here." Mercer crouched beside the MG-34 team. The weapon was intact except for a bent bipod leg. They never had time to fire. Briggs marked the location on a notepad. "We'll have the weapons squad recover this later. No point dragging it now." A faint sound, movement, made all three men pause. Reed held up a fist. A German soldier, wounded from the firefight, attempted to push himself onto his elbows near a fallen tree. His uniform was soaked with mud. He wasn't armed. His rifle lay several feet away. Reed approached cautiously with Briggs. Mercer covered from behind. The German's breathing was irregular. He didn't try to reach for his weapon. His eyes tracked Reed for a moment, then shifted to the sky above the tree line. Briggs exhaled through his nose. "We mark him for medics." Reed knelt briefly to check the man for booby traps, common in late war engagements. Finding none, he placed a small strip of white cloth near the soldier's boot. "Medical team will pick him up." There was no interaction beyond that. No conversation. The rules were strictly followed. By 9:40, the sweep was complete. Carter halted further forward movement. "No more clearing. We're holding this line until company confirms relief." The platoon returned to their positions. The forest was quiet again, not peaceful but subdued. Private Danners, who had kept the ammunition box during the firefight, finally spoke. "Didn't think the trap would matter that much," he said. Reed wiped mud from his gloves. "It slowed them. It changed their expectations." That's why they walked into the line the way they did. Mercer added, they thought they had already found our forward defense. Carter approached. His uniform sleeves were dirty from kneeling earlier. You two caused more disruption with a strip of wire and 2 grenades than some units manage with a full engineering team, he said plainly. Reed remained focused on the tree line. It worked because they moved fast after the first hit. They assumed we were spread thin. Carter gave a short nod. Command wants a full report once we rotate back. But for now, we keep watch. Briggs clapped both men lightly on the shoulders. Stay sharp. This isn't over until we get relieved. The platoon settled into defensive posture once more, rifles loaded, eyes scanning the forest. No one relaxed fully. Everyone understood that German units in this sector sometimes regrouped faster than expected. But the major assault attempt had already happened, and it had failed. The forest held steady for the next hour. No movement, no artillery, only the distant sound of engines far beyond the tree line. Perhaps trucks repositioning, perhaps retreating. Only intelligence could confirm that later. As the morning advanced, Reed's earlier impression solidified into certainty. The 19 seconds that had broken the German assault were not luck, nor coincidence. They were the direct result of a simple, improvised trap that shifted enemy expectations and forced them into a predictable line of approach. It wasn't complex engineering. It wasn't formal doctrine. It was a battlefield adjustment at the lowest level, simple, functional, and effective. By midday, the forest looked different. Sunlight pushed through the canopy in broad patches. The smoke had cleared. The sounds of the last firefight faded into the background of ordinary frontline noise. Distant artillery, the hum of supply trucks somewhere far off, and the quiet movement of branches in the wind. The platoon remained on full alert, but the tension had eased. Men leaned against their shallow trench walls, checked their gear again, and monitored assigned sectors. Lieutenant Carter rotated pairs of soldiers to eat quickly behind the line, ensuring everyone stayed functional. Reed and Mercer sat beside a small patch of moss, rifles propped on their knees. Their uniforms were still damp, streaked with mud. Reed removed his helmet and wiped sweat from his forehead. Mercer took a long drink from his canteen. Briggs walked over. You two stay here. Carter will want you for the report as soon as Company HQ calls in. Reed nodded. Any word from the other platoons? Nothing heavy, Briggs said. Some probing along 1st Platoon sector, but no follow-up. Looks like the assault we took was the main effort for this area. Mercer exhaled. So it's holding. For now, Briggs replied. We're waiting for confirmation. By 12:40, a messenger from Company A arrived, moving quickly but not hurriedly. He spoke with Carter at the far edge of the trench line, then left the way he came. A few minutes later, Carter called out, Reed, Mercer, Briggs. With me. The 3 men walked to the far stump where Carter unfolded a small notebook. Battalion has updated the sector map. The Germans have pulled back half a kilometer. Their assault company suffered significant losses this morning. They're regrouping elsewhere. Reed stood straight. So we're staying here? Yes, Carter replied. But the line is stable now. No additional attacks expected today. Mercer asked, what about relief? Carter checked his watch. 2 hours. Another company will take over this stretch. When they arrive, we return to the fallback area for debrief. Carter looked at Reed for a moment. Your trap changed the tempo of the morning. Battalion wants the exact breakdown, materials used, placement, timing, everything. Reed answered plainly. I'll give them a full sequence. It wasn't complicated. Anyone could build the same thing. Carter closed the notebook. Most men don't think to. That's the point. Later that afternoon, at 14:50, the relief company arrived. Fresh uniforms, clean helmets, rifles that hadn't fired that morning. They moved into the American line, while Reed's platoon gathered equipment, policed their area, and prepared to withdraw. As Reed stepped away from the trench for the final time, he glanced once more toward the depression where the trap had exploded hours earlier. The ground was torn open, soil scattered in a wide radius. Nothing about it looked remarkable at a distance. Mercer followed his eyes. Hard to believe that Spot caused all this. Reed adjusted the sling of his rifle. It worked because they trusted the terrain. They thought it was just another low point in the forest. Briggs approached from behind. "Let's move. Company's waiting." The platoon walked along a narrow forest road, boots sinking into mud softened by the morning rain. Most men stayed quiet, processing the day in their own way. A few exchanged short remarks about ammunition counts, weapon cleaning, or how long they might get to rest before the next assignment. Back at the fallback area, company staff began the debriefs. Lieutenant Carter had Reed stand beside a folding map table under a canvas tarp. Several officers and an intelligence NCO listened while Reed explained the trap, step by step, clear and precise. Wire. 2 grenades. Placement. Distance. Expected enemy route. Timing. No dramatization. No speculation. Just practical details. The Intel NCO wrote everything down. "We'll circulate this to other platoons," he said. "It may help them in similar terrain." Reed simply nodded. Evening. When the debrief ended, the platoon was allowed to rest. They sat by a low fire near a supply jeep. The air was cold and still. For the first time that day, the forest felt calm. Private Hale stirred a mug of instant coffee. "You think the Germans will try another push tomorrow?" he asked. Briggs shook his head. "Not after what they walked into today. They'll shift somewhere else." Mercer leaned back against his pack. That 19 seconds decided their whole plan. Hale looked at Reed. "You really think they didn't expect the line to be there?" Reed answered after a short pause. "They reacted to what they saw. The trap made them think they were hitting our outer edge. They adjusted everything based on that assumption." Hale nodded slowly. "I guess small things matter out here." "They do," Reed said, not with pride, but with the practical certainty of a man who had seen the results. Closing reflection. By nightfall, the forest was silent again. No gunfire, no distant patrols, just the steady cold air settling between trees. The events of the day would be recorded in company reports and translated into numbers, enemy casualties, ammunition used, positions held. But for the men who had been there, the memory remained physical. Smoke drifting low through the trees, boots pressing into wet soil, the sharp crack of rifles, and the split-second tension before the 19 seconds began. Reed's improvised trap was not extraordinary in design. It was simple, assembled quickly, and made from standard equipment. But the effect was real. It shaped the movements of an enemy force, set the conditions for a successful defense, and prevented a larger breakthrough in that sector. Small decisions made by ordinary soldiers often change the shape of battlefields. Not through dramatic heroics, not through elaborate tactics, but through practical choices, timing, and awareness in the middle of uncertainty. That day in the forest, a length of wire and 2 grenades had done exactly that. And the men who held the line carried the memory with them long after the forest fell quiet.